NWSL Rivalry weekend is here, and we are going to decide which ones we think are real. Welcome to this week's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. It is Wednesday, August 6th, and we've got an NWSL slate full of grudge matches, rivalry games, and a couple stash games here or there. We are going to not only be talking about these games, we are going to rank them. A lot to dig into. Let's jump in. So it is NWSL Rivalry Week, formally this time. It's kind of a new thing for this year, a formal weekend set up for some late season excitement. We're going to have every single team playing, and what the NWSL is presenting as every single game is going to be a rivalry game for one reason or another. They're trying to find like a decent hook for some August regular season action. It's a league forward thing. So as we know, sometimes that can start to feel a little bit corporate, but I'll be honest, a lot of these hit the mark in one shape or form for me. But I think what we're going to do today, because this is my podcast, is I'm going to play like judge and jury on these. I'm going to not only talk about these rivalry games, but we're going to rank them into tiers, because I think we have some S tier stuff going on this weekend, and I think we got some F tier stuff going on this weekend, and we got to kind of get it right, talk about which ones we think are kind of more organic and which ones feel like there's kind of shoehorned in because the league does not know what to do with those games. Now, rivalries can be built on a lot of different things. I don't think I'm explaining anything new to your average sports fan. I think there are a lot of reasons why you might have a series of rivalries, whether it's history between two teams, maybe one team knocked the other one out of a championship, that can build a rivalry energy, just regional proximity. I think that you see that a lot in more established leagues, and I think we're trying to grow that a little bit more in women's sports, kind of get those same regional rivalries that you get, those regional annoyances. And then I think also there's a kind of sense of national relevance necessary, particularly in women's sports, to add a little bit of edge to a rivalry. Are these two teams good? Are these two title contenders? Are there hooks to think that this game in particular might be a good one? Are there standings implications? That can also add a little bit of fuel to the fire. And I think also the main question that we always come to, and we're going to talk about this, because I think there are games in this list that have all of these different things. But for the NWSL, it's the same question as I think for many different women's sports leagues, which is, if a league is less than 15 years old, how much hatred is there really? How long can the beef go? Is there an idea that maybe we need more of these rivalries to be based on recent history? Or do we need to kind of let things simmer and maybe let these rivalries build over time? So there are already some good rivalries in this league. I think there are two that really stick out to me, but there's only one for me that is in the S tier of NWSL rivalries in 2025. And it might not be the one you think. That for me is Washington versus Gotham. Now, I think they try to overcook this one sometimes. I think the slogans, I think getting the front offices involved, overcooking the marketing, I think that can start to feel like this is manufactured. But to me, this is the perfect example of proximity, familiarity, and national relevance due to both form and just star power on both of these teams. There is a history of regional competition between Washington, D.C. and New York, New Jersey, right? You see it in other sports. And I don't usually like to compare to men's sports, but I think in rivalries, you can do that because that's like born into, right? If you were born into a region, these more established leagues are going to influence how you feel about teams from other cities. General dislike baked in here between DC and New York. Like in football, you've got the Commanders and the Giants in the same division. In baseball, you've got the Nationals and the Mets in the same division. This doesn't come from nowhere regionally between New York and Washington, DC. And these teams also, especially in off the dome, like in the last 5 years, have played each other so much due to that proximity, because of the way that the NWSL sometimes goes into unbalanced scheduling to make less travel, to make things a little bit easier on teams. The Spirit and Gotham play each other constantly. And that goes back to back when the Sky Blue days, 2019, 2018, 2017, they played each other in the playoffs last year. There's this East Coast proximity that feels very, very earned to me, even though these are new iterations of these new teams under, new ownership, new looks. But that just gives you a recent hook. I do think that there's some history there, as much as that can build in an NWSL context. I also think this one gets a boost because both of these teams are really exciting right now. They've won things recently, and there's so much star power. Washington obviously is the most recent championship runner up. They're the reigning Challenge Cup winners. And even just like last week, right, they're coming off this awesome Croy Bethune and Trinity Rodman return. It feels like, Rowdy Outy was moving. You had the spirit kind of back where we expected them to be at the beginning of the season. Flashy, fun, winners, more hardware this season under all-star circumstances, definitely a possibility. But then they're traveling to Gotham, right? 2023 NWSL champion, newly crowned CONCACAF Champions Cup champion. And they have this wealth of U.S. and international stars that we know like to get up for a game like this, right? Rose Lavelle, Emily Sonnet, Astaire, Jess Carter, AKB. Stars on both sides. And I also, I legit think, and everyone's very professional about it, but I just don't think these players like playing each other that much. I don't think these teams like it. I don't think they like playing each other. I think they get upset when they lose to this other team with a little bit more of an edge than maybe some other matchups. I mean, I think you could even go all the way back, right, to Rodman versus Ashlyn Harris Twitter beef in 2022, right? There is a little bit of an edge here. They don't like losing to each other. And both teams of these teams are trying to build this kind of regular season portfolio to set themselves up well for this year's postseason. There's only one thing, well, not only one thing, but the main thing that going into this that feels like it could put a damper on this matchup is it's kind of like I was saying last week. Gotham needs to pick up the pace a little bit here. We saw the big triumphant return for the Spirit. They have done a really good job of staying in the top 4 of the standings despite dealing with injuries, and now they're getting all of those players back. Gotham is still sitting in 8th. They had to settle for a draw against Chicago last weekend. It seems like Midge Purce is doing well. She had to leave that match with a little bit of a knock, but it seems like she's doing okay. It just still doesn't feel like this team is firing on all cylinders yet. But they are hosting this game. It's going to be a huge crowd. They've opened the Upper Bowl. If you're in the area, go see it, because the hope is that not only is this going to be a game with feeling, rivalry game, but also just a fabulous showcase of NWSL soccer between two of the more dynamic teams, or teams that have the potential to be two of the more dynamic teams in the league. So that is my number one. It's getting a lot of the hype for good reason. And I think you just can't let the marketing jargon get in the way. This one is real. I don't think these teams like each other. They're both really good. There's huge star power going on here, and they're fighting above the playoff line. That is the makings of a great rivalry game. The second game that I'm actually not even going to put S tier, and I'll tell you why, but this is A tier for me, and I don't think there's anything that could move this one out of the A tier. Not surprising, Portland versus Seattle. The Cascadia Cup, the classic rivalry, the godmother of NWSL rivalry games, the cultural cornerstone that has existed far before the NWSL even existed, and will probably go on far beyond sports crumble to dust, right? This one is real because of the regionality, because of the history in the two cities, and because these are two soccer-loving areas that really get into it. A good homegrown rivalry that has the history. They have the proximity. They have a wonderful history of national relevance, which is kind of in a resurgence this year. Both teams are above the playoff line. Stars that have walked the halls of this game. Really cool, really intense. Some of the legends of the NWSL. There's a song. Portland Riveters have a song about this. This one is if you're going to sit on kind of any sort of cornerstone, like I said, of rivalries, this one has the cultural element. It has the history. And I like it because, like I said, I don't think it's bad to lean into these two cities don't like each other, and that's good. That's just sports. And I like that on the women's side, even though you don't see it as much. Now, this is A tier for me. There are years where this one was S tier, but this is A tier for me this year. It has maybe lost its sizzle just a little bit in recent years, but only just because of the history in the past for this one. This game is a history not only of two of the early best teams in the league, but this was Crash Out City, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, 6 years ago. This was like the original hothead rivalry. You have to think about the players that have played in this game. Tobin Heath, Lindsay Horan, Megan Rapinoe, Megan Klingenberg, Allie Long, Nadia Nadim, a young Emily Sonnet. Some of these players played for both teams at different times in their careers. This was a game fueled by dislike, crash outs. You got, Megan Rapinoe flipping off the Riveters in the North End. This stuff is real, but maybe a little bit less this year as both of these teams are still kind of figuring their identities out. Jess Fishlock is still involved. She comes off a ridiculously good game in the Reigns return after the break last week. Portland's maybe got the better midfield, but they could absolutely get blown up in the defense. I always kind of am rooting sometimes for the away team in these games because I think that also adds a little bit of a bite. I think anytime the away team can walk in and get an edge against the other team's fans, I think that that's huge. The fans are going to absolutely bring it. The only thing that could bring this one down is kind of the styles of these two teams this year. Like I said, it used to be hothead city. It used to be big fireworks, big names. These two teams are a little bit more pragmatic these days. I think we saw this with Seattle last week. I made my little pitch about Seattle being a bit boring. They did it again and they beat Angel City doing it. Like they're going to do everything they can to do that slow roll. It feels like it's trolling me specifically sometimes, starting that 5 back, getting completely rewarded for it, very methodical, bringing attacking reserves in very late in the second half. Don't let the game wide up. Don't let it turn into a track meet. Keep both XGs low and then take your chance. This is the Laura Harvey way. It's a good way to win soccer games, but it's not always the best to drive, the epic peak of a regional rivalry. So I love the Cascadia rivalry. I love the Cascadia Cup. I'm really, really happy that we're seeing that, again, that national relevance, that NWSL relevance for both teams this year as both are kind of pushing up above the playoff line. I love that. But I need like a little bit more edge again, a little bit more hatred, maybe a crash out or two. Bring that back to the Cascadia rivalry. But this one, it has a soft place in my heart, and I think every NWSL fan's heart, and it will never go below A tier for me. So as we go down this list, we're now moving into the B tier, which is where there are hooks here. And I'm going to explain the hooks to these different matchups because I think there's something brewing. But you got to kind of look to find them. We've got new clubs. We've got kind of these wide gaps in the standings this year. We're moving into expansion teams. Very hard to build history for an expansion team. And I'm not blaming anybody for that. That can just only come with time. So like a good example of that is in this B tier. This is where I do put Angel City versus the San Diego Wave. There's a decent pitch here, right? Like this has the makings over time of a really good rivalry. They're both Southern California teams. They both entered the league in the same year, so they will forever be compared to one another in terms of their overall trajectories. They're very competitive with one another, not only on the pitch, but you can kind of see it off the pitch too. Like this idea, again, sort of entering the league of this business success, wanting to be considered the premier organization of the Southern California area. Very strong regional concept. I mean, there's some of that you see again, like in baseball, right? You've got Padres, Dodgers in the same division. Like there is something there. When you're in LA, people talk about San Diego. And when you're in San Diego, people talk about LA. There is actually something there. Is not always maybe as kind of like heated, but the proximity is very real. And there is also this concept, I think, of San Diego little sistering LA in results since they've entered the league in 2022. But I don't think that's actually the worst thing in the world for this particular matchup because Angel City in this matchup gives as good as they get. The Wave obviously win the Shield in 2023. They have the strong point in the standings this year. They are above the playoff line. LA is below the playoff line. The Wave have the larger history of consistency on the field. But that's what makes the head-to-head fun because Angel City has beaten, like I don't think San Diego, I looked at the head-to-head, San Diego hasn't beaten Angel City in this game since 2023. Obviously influenced by a down year from the Wave last year, but also LA is kind of this team's Achilles heel. Sometimes San Diego goes into this game thinking they've got it all wrapped up, and Angel City pulls a rabbit out of the hat and has them walking away without any points. That's what gives this the juice for me. Because I think what this has turned into a little bit, and I don't think either team would exactly admit this, but San Diego's the more consistent winner. But LA, despite the lack of consistency in their overall results, is the annoying team that can get them on any given day. And that's exactly who Angel City has been this year as well. So they have to build their two new teams, more history that has to happen. But again, I'm like rooting for the underdog here because I think that's not only a landmark of this rivalry so far, but I think that's what continues to build this. So I think if you're rooting for chaos, you're an Angel City fan this weekend. Similarly, this one is still B tier for me, and you might laugh, but I'm also going to laugh because this one's almost funny. Kansas City versus Utah. It's not going to be a competitive game. It shouldn't be a competitive game. If it is a competitive game, that's a rivalry for sure because Utah is the steep underdog in this one. But there's too much backstory and recent interaction between these two teams to stick this down into the C tier for me. I don't think it's going to be an actual B tier game. Kansas City, as we know, is running away with the 2025 Shield. They've got, I think it's like a 10-point lead now. They are They're cruising at number 1. Utah, the exact opposite. They are in the league basement. So if Utah gets anything out of this, that's going to be a wild exceeding of expectations. But also, like, these teams are the new version of each other's former selves, and therefore there will always be a little bit of history here. And they also just pulled off, as we know, a major trade that could add an additional level of spice if Ali Setnor gets into this game for Kansas City. There's nothing regionally here other than, both teams are kind of nominally in the middle of the country, but Kansas City are the rebranded bones of the former Utah Royals, which themselves were the transferred roster from the original FC Kansas City before re-entering as a true expansion side last year. And that kind of stuff, that does garner hurt feelings, I think. There is a long history of like one market's gain and joy being another market's real like loss and heartbreak. It hurts to lose a team. It's euphoric to get a team back. There's something there, if not maybe between like the players, but between the fan bases. If you love a team deeply like that and it moves to another city, you're always going to resent that city just a little bit. And then when the tables turn, it's on the flip side. And then also, like I said, KC just nabbed one of Utah's best players in forward Ali Setnor, which feels like a trade maybe spurred. This is pure speculation, but perhaps by Setnor not seeing a competitive future with the Royals. And that also, like, I don't know, if I was a Royals fan, I'd be a little annoyed by that. I mean, I'd be like, yeah, my team's bad, but you don't have to do anything about it. Like, I think that there's something there where I would imagine the Royals would want to come into this one with a little bit, again, just a little bit of an edge, wanting to get a result, shock the current, because I think there's a little point of pride here. Not only, again, by the fact that these teams kind of off the pitch have spurred both like really positive and negative feelings with each other, but because KC just kind of swiped one of your best players. And I think if I were Utah, I'd say, okay, bet, let's get a result here. Utah has to improve for this one to feel truly real over time. But I do think that this weekend presents a very unique opportunity for them. And I like that. Now we move on to where all of these are kind of nebulous. I'm maybe grasping at straws. We're moving into the C tier. I may be a little bit too positive about some of these, a little too negative about the rest of them, but there are 3 games here that feel a little bit like the NWSL got everything put together and then didn't know what to do. I think the first one is Orlando versus Louisville. This one for me is saved by the saved like from the F tier by both teams being really nicely competitive this year. And if you can't have a regional rivalry or a deep history in women's sports, how about let's just talk about like right now. This is a 2025 rivalry because Louisville did beat Orlando 2-0 prior to the midseason break. Racing is really trying to prove that they can be a playoff team this year. They want to run with the best. And the Pride are also trying to prove that last year is at least somewhat replicable. They've looked a little bit less unbeatable this year. A big revenge win off of the season would go a long way. I don't know. I mean, I think that I made my pitch for KC Utah, but I also think that a missed opportunity in terms of real heat from 2 really good teams is sort of this building KC Orlando rivalry. This is one that's not based on anything other than the fact that they keep winning against each other. There's some real bad blood there coming off of last season. KC this year has the upper hand in terms of the results than Orlando did, which is kind of flip-flopping what we saw last year. Those are 2 teams that just don't like each other at all. But if Louisville can work their way in under Orlando's skin with another win here, that's enough for me on this one right now. That saves it in the C tier. So my thoughts with like the Kansas City and Orlando, I think that there's some reconfiguring that you could do to make it a little bit more nationally relevant, but I don't know. Again, Louisville took the win this year. Maybe they can do it again, and that's the basis of something. So that's C tier for me. The other C tier matchup is Chicago versus Bay FC. Oh boy, it's the baseball wars, I suppose. This one is really hurt by the fact that both teams are not very good. There's obviously no regionality. Like, I'm based in Chicago, and when this was announced, I'm like, the Bay. Like, I just don't even think that like Chicago sports like thinks about the Bay that much. There's just a lot of overlap there. Usually if you're playing a team from that far away, it means that you've like done really well in the postseason, so you're just happy about that. There's just not a lot of juice there, and so that one's a little bit strange, especially because these are 2 cities with such lovely long sports histories that when you're trying to sell something like this, you go to me and you go like the average Chicago sports fan, and I go like I don't see it. That doesn't feel great. I think part of that is limited just by where teams exist. I don't think there's no Detroit NWSL team. There's no, Indiana NWSL team. We have the Kansas City one, but as people know, like Chicago has a little bit more of a rivalry with St. Louis than necessarily Kansas City. But they could go regionality. They chose not to do that, I think, because both of these teams have been struggling for national relevance. But I don't know. BFC did ruin Chicago's big Wrigley game last year. It set the NWSL attendance record, but they lost to the Bay. And they're also trying to kind of steal that attendance record. People know that BFC are doing their own baseball hosted game to try to set a new NWSL record. So there's a little bit there. I mean, I did get the sense when this was announced that Chicago fans were like, yeah, that sucked when we went to Wrigley and BFC won the game. So I think that there's a little bit of juice there, especially on the Chicago side. Obviously, the baseball wars are kind of funny as well, right? Because the Stars are owned by Laura Ricketts, who is a co-owner of the Chicago Cubs. So there is actually a little bit of a baseball hook here. I don't know. I don't think there's a lot of love lost between Chicago fans and their BFC counterparts. But the fact that both of these teams are probably just desperate for a couple points takes the edge out of this one. So this one's struggling in some of the criteria, again, of regionality, caring about it as a general sports fan. But I think if you have to do this with an expansion team, there's a little bit of history there. And there is just sort of this funny continuance of NWSL records, baseball games, beating each other, not beating each other. So I'll give this one a C. That saves it from the F tier for me, which brings us to the basement, the bottom of the barrel, the F tier. There's only one game here. I think any of the two C tiers you could drop into this, but this one just really stuck out to me. If you are from either of these areas and can explain to me why I'm wrong, please do. But Houston versus North Carolina, I don't get it. They're not regional rivals. They don't have a standing sports rivalry in any other sports. They haven't been on similar trajectories at all since joining their respective markets in the NWSL. Houston has only made the playoff once in the team's history, and they did not play North Carolina in that playoff game. Their 2020 Challenge Cup win was nowhere near North Carolina. I don't think North Carolina even made the knockouts of the Challenge Cup, if I'm recalling correctly. There's nothing there. These teams don't, I think, have huge concepts of each other in their heads. North Carolina's championship history, there's no Houston. Houston's rise to try to, have more consistent success has not been thwarted by North Carolina. This feels like a stash game, a real stash game, which maybe just underlines, and I said this about Chicago, but perhaps these, and I don't think it's a surprise that some of these are teams that are in the middle of the country where there's a little bit more space in between teams and you see less regionality. The NWSL could maybe use more neighbors for teams like Houston and teams like North Carolina. It'll be nice to get Denver involved, though again, I would need someone to explain to me maybe who Denver's rivals are, again, as a Midwesterner. But Texas is a big place. The South is a big place. The NWSL could probably stand to develop more of a presence there. I mean, if you want to go with just back to fun in-game beef, as we know, Houston and Orlando have had some hotheads. They've had some clashes in the past. North Carolina back in the day had a little thing going with Chicago back when everything was completely different for both teams. But there, if you want something with a little bit of juice to it, there is recent history to draw on if you want to do that. As we know, North Carolina crushed Chicago in the NWSL final in 2019. And then Chicago was always really good at getting North Carolina's goat in the regular season. There is stuff here, but it's just kind of been abandoned for these new versions, which leads me to, and I think, using this one as an example, my F tier of Houston and North Carolina, because I just don't get it. I don't think you can force rivalries. And so, yeah, some of these you have to dig in to find it, but there are some things where you can find those hooks, those grounding portions of why two teams might not like each other very much. But this is why a full weekend dictated by the league of rivalry games doesn't make a ton of sense. It tends to prop up some games and kind of tank other games. Some of these are really, really good, very organic, have a lot going for them. But some maybe perhaps cheapened by the fact that some of them, the other games, don't make any sense. The newness of women's sports in general sometimes goes against the way true rivalries take time. The expansion sheen is still sitting on some of these teams. You're still kind of taking the plastic wrap off of some of these teams, and that's going to have an impact on feeling like there's a rivalry there. But a little bit of extra hype, maybe an upset or two, like I said, with some of these lower tier games, all you got to do is make them interesting, and maybe that is how an upset is born. Bad blood comes from winning and losing on the pitch. So if some of these underdogs can come in and make a showing, then maybe we got a little bit cooking here. The Late Sub is part of the Just Women's Sports Network. This show is written by Claire Watkins and produced and edited by Parker Fenton. To get more of your favorite women's sports content, subscribe to the Just Women's Sports newsletter and follow Just Women's Sports across all your favorite channels.